So to understand social human behavior and consciousness mathematically, we must first start with a question: where is consciousness in a human? By definition, you can only be phenomenologically aware of what you can consciously sense. The structure of a sentient being, like humans sensing its world, is composed of a hierarchy of phenomena that self-organize to a sense-making body that has conscious human experiences. This is also known as autopoiesis, Greek word. This is information exchanging and nested at different temporal scales. Well, that was perceptual depth, but can be thought of as temporal depth. These interactions are summarized at higher or lower levels of the hierarchy via the mechanism of predictive coding. This means ascending information sent to higher levels are treated as the active states that provide prediction errors, and descending information are the sensory states being written, i.e. defining and adapting the new present configurations of the level. Within a human, this hierarchy represents the different levels of energy exchange from molecular dynamics to brain region interconnectivity. Following this, a human agent is capable of acting, hence influencing the universe, which means he can not only sense the universe, but also infer a set of actions that will affect the universe. You will come back. You will come back. However, not every single level of this internal hierarchy is needed for the human agent to experience their actions. Therefore, by comparing the levels where actions of the human being are best registered, we can identify the levels of information exchange pertinent to conscious experience, which we can call inner screen. For example, imagine the canvas where a film projects your memories, which is inaccessible to others. Just for me, not for you. This also means that some of the internal activity is hidden from conscious experience, behind a boundary. Example, most cellular activity. The idea that internal states, such as an inner screen, within a boundary, for example, human skin, or the allegorical wall between conscious and unconsciousness that Freud depicted with his iceberg, can be modeled mathematically. So an internal state separated by a boundary can observe and act without being observable by the external is described by a Markov blanket that separates the internal from the external, or alternatively, a holographic screen that represents the space of interaction between an internal system and an environment that hosts it. A hierarchy of such inner phenomena or mechanisms and their boundaries is called a holarchy or heterarchy or hierarchy of holons. In a holographic holarchic system like a conscious human, there are three statements that are true. Number one, no two components of the multi-component system experiences the same environment. Both hands are at different places. Two, no component experiences the environment like the whole system. My consciousness compared to my hands, the whole system does not experience as any of its components. Further, based on the integrated information theory by Giulio Tononi, the whole of a physical system can have its consciousness level quantified relative to the complexity of the structure uniting its parts, with the phi variable that he describes, and thus have its phenomenological conscious structure estimated in relation to the environment or inner screen experienced. What I meant is that its phenomenological aspect reflects the environment it is observing, can be estimated from this phi variable. By definition, you can only be phenomenologically aware of what you can consciously sense. An individual's consciousness is linked to information exchange within a holarchic system. Most of the time, consciousness is tied to an environment. So, because a whole system is part of an environment, which is another system, for example, a social setting where the environment would be another human, we can describe the interaction between two humans, let's say Alfred, Boris, as following. All actions of Alfred that are written on their shared boundary, holographic screen, are observed or read by Boris, who attempts to take into consideration all of the sensory information, and vice versa. This is known as maximum likelihood estimation problem. This is obviously in the situation where Alfred and Boris are not isolated and are independent, conditionally independent, more precisely, or unentangled, which is that the actions of one is not already fully predicted by the other. Synchrony, or shared beliefs about the world, is achievable between Alfred and Boris when both humans emphasize and attenuate the same sensory inputs. Here, both parties will be assigning similar attentional selection, precision, or force, or weight, or confidence. So one of those, let's say precision, assign similar precisions to the prediction errors of the perceived stimuli, jointly reducing free energy, which is the mismatch between belief and sensation, as a social group. This subtle connection, definable as resonant synchronicity, between Alfred and Boris is not necessarily observable, and so it is a covert action of their brains. This is sharing the inner screen clockwork, where arousal and attention are the core cogs that define context, written by the brainstem, inferior colliculi, and hippocampus activity, which are read and modulated by our self-awareness. In other words, the cortical activity, such as the default mode network, which finally turns out to be the deepest layers in the holarchy of humans. The functioning of their anatomy is thus only observable when the human's actions have registered sensory consequences in the environment, in comparison to anatomy within the body. This sparse reciprocal coupling within the brain physiology represents beliefs about causes of sensation, which change over time. This is described by the Fokker-Planck equation, which is then solved with a Markov blanket Monte Carlo simulation. In essence, it mathematically describes how the imagined set of probable consequences of my sensations changes when I feel unexpected sensory input. The free energy principle is a method that describes the most likely belief updating or prediction error correction for an organism. And it is called active inference when it describes two humans interacting, such as Alfred and Boris. What characteristics does the energy between Alfred and Boris have? Good question. Firstly, organisms like humans defy the second law of thermodynamics, that energy constantly dissipates. Therefore, humans enact negative entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. To be correct, the fundamental reality of the law of entropy is not violated. Living organisms like humans reduce entropy locally thanks to efficient metabolic mechanisms for using and storing energy in the body. However, this local reduction of entropy, synonymous with free energy reduction, still dissipates energy into the environment, thereby increasing the total entropy of the environment. Moreover, this negative entropy can be represented as a geometrical attractor that defines the equilibrium searched by the human organism. This geometrical attractor represents prior preferences or tendencies of Alfred's environmental adaptation, called Alfred's generative model, which can be Lorentz attractor, can be any type of geometrical form. This is the case for one individual, Alfred. In an observable environment, E, this is the observable environment, where Alfred and Boris interact. The boundary by which Alfred and Boris interact will have a specific zone where free energy exchange between both humans occur, where the rest of the boundary would still be processed, but in the background, unconsciously, to maintain both systems' organization and form. We will divide this boundary into equal points at which energy exchange occurs, also known as qubit information vectors. To reiterate, the qubits of free energy in the conscious zone of Alfred and Boris's boundary screen, the conscious zone, may be regarded by one, let's say Alfred's, as epistemic information gain of fuel, and as waste information output, possibly heat, by Boris, and vice versa. Naturally, following the law of conservation of mass energy, the unchanging total energy of the ecological system, which is known as Hamiltonian of the environment E, minus the Hamiltonian of Alfred's and Boris, respectively, is equal to the Hamiltonian of the social interaction between Alfred and Boris. Nested interconnected Markov blanket states are holons.